For some reason in the last video I said that we were going to be using our persistent data in our codex, but what I meant to say was image gallery, because we want to know what images we've unlocked throughout every playthrough. So in this video, let's actually work on our codex. You'll notice that I made a new folder here called codex entries. If we go into here, all we have is a bunch of dialogues. Most of these actually aren't anything, really. They're just game instance and question mark, and I'll get into why that is later. The where is it? Pot over here though is actually a thing, and let's discuss why we're using our dialogue system for our codex first. The reason is because I want our codex to reflect what we've done in the game. For example, this pot, if we don't know any information about it, it just says a pot in the codex. But if we looked up or if we inspected it, it will say a brown clay pot in our codex instead. And also if we break it, it will update to say, sadly it was broken, never to be usable again. So that's what I mean by I wanted to reflect what happened throughout our playthrough, because, you know, obviously this is a very simple example, but maybe if you have like a history of a place or something in your codex and you want to you want some major events to happen that you affect, you want that to reflect that in your codex, you know? And normally to do that we would just use a bunch of if statements and, you know, return a bunch of text to display on our codex, but that would be pretty ugly and kind of harder to read in my opinion. So that's why we're using our dialogue system. We're not actually going to have any choices. These select nodes are just going to select the very first available one. So our selector nodes are basically our if statements, and all we're going to do is just go down until we eventually hit an end. So at the very start, you'll notice that it's just pot and question mark for our first text possibilities. And that's because this is going to be the name of the button that we can click on and the what shows up in the title bar for our codex. Because, well, names can sometimes give things away. So if you don't know any information about it, we'll just have it be a question mark that leads to an end node, meaning there won't be any information displayed in our codex. Anyways, let's work on our codex now. We're going to need some widgets. They're going to be user interface, widget blueprints, w_codex, w_codex button, and w_codex, let's call this detail. Oh, one more thing I forgot to mention actually. The way we're getting the details about our codex, you'll see in our pot over here. What we're checking is our game instance. We're checking if our game instance has a condition named, or if we check the condition named pot in game instance, if it returns true or not. So we have to actually deal with that. In our test dialog over here, in this second line, we have an enter event where we say game instance, do an event called pot. And that's how we're going to tell our game instance to trigger flags, basically. So this is a remnant from my last take. Let me just delete this. Actually, I might as well just remake it right now. I'm going to call this triggered flags. And as you saw, it's going to be an array of names. And we need this to be a dialog participant, so let's go to our class settings and add an interface for DLG dialog participant. We need to override the get participant name. And on the dialog event, what we're going to do is just add the event name to our triggered flags. So get our triggered flags and add unique. And the reason we're doing add unique is because it's not going to add it if it's already in our array. And we don't need to add it multiple times because this is just a flag that we've triggered. There's no need to know how many of them are in there, because all we're going to do is check to see if it's in here or not. So in our check condition, we're going to get our triggered flags and just say contains. We're going to ask if it contains the condition name we pass in. Compile save. So back in our test dialog, when we hit this node, we're going to tell the game instance to do the event pot, which we'll call this function, which will add it to our triggered flags. And then in our Codex pot, we're going to ask if the game instance has, or if you pass in a condition named pot into our game instance, if it will return true, which we'll call this function. Alright. Let's make sure we can actually get our game instance though from the participant. So back in our dialog, in the graph get participants, we need to add a pin for our game instance. So game instance right there. Let's just copy and paste this, passing in the get game instance. One more thing, this is actually something I screwed up a long time ago when I first made this function. We need this to say if our found participant's length is less than our get participant's num. Otherwise, this will cause things to go very badly when the dialog thinks that none is a participant. So if that was screwing you over, I sincerely apologize about that. Hopefully you figured it out for yourself, or you've seen this video before it messed you up. And in the add participants, or yeah, found participants, we add it ourselves when this error occurs, when it thinks that none is a participant. Instead of adding ourselves, because back then we could assume that our dialog was a participant because we would need to tell it to change our backgrounds and stuff like that. But now that's not the case because we're going to be using this for our dialog, our Codex system. So instead we're going to get a copy at 0 because this is going to be guaranteed to be a participant. And we're going to add that into our found participants instead. So let's compile and save this. And now back into our Codex stuff. Our Codex details is just going to be, let's delete this canvas panel, a rich text block. And we need to make sure this is auto wrap text. Also, we need to make sure to set the text style set, otherwise nothing will show up. Compile and save, and this is just going to be the details that shows up. For example, a brown clay pot will get its own Codex detail, and the slightly was broken, never be usable again is also going to get its own Codex detail. Let's work on our Codex button. Delete this. This is just going to be a button with a text in it. I'm going to make the size 28 and black. Make sure this is a variable as well, and we will deal with the logic later. Let's go into our Codex, and I'm going to split this into two parts. Not video parts, but parts of our screen. The left side is going to be where our buttons go, and the right side is going to be where the details go. So I'm going to add an H box, or I'm going to replace our canvas panel with an H box. And I'm going to drag a scroll box into our H box. This is going to be the left side. Make sure it's a variable, and we're going to call it button scroll box. And on the right side, we are going to want a title at the top. So, and we want the details underneath that. So I'm going to add a V box to that, to our horizontal box over here. And then in the V box, I'm going to make it fill, so it takes up the rest of the screen, wherever the buttons don't take up. And I'm going to add the text to the top. This is going to be our title text. Make sure it's variable. Make it centered. Size of 28 and black. Also, I'm going to need another scroll box underneath it, so go back to my scroll box into our vertical box. This is going to be my details scroll box. Make this fill, and that should be fine for a scroll box. Compile and save, and let's actually get these buttons added in here. Now, we can get rid of this pre-construct, and we can get rid of the event tick. We could manually add all these buttons one by one. If you go into our Codex entries, you'll see a ton of these. And it would just be a lot of buttons to add. Like, especially if you had way more than this. I've seen some visual novels with like 100 Codex entries. It would just be a huge pain. So instead we're going to do it procedurally. And to do that, first we need to be able to find all of these. And we can do that using the asset manager. So if we go into edit project settings, asset manager over here, where it says primary asset types to scan, hit this plus sign to add another asset type. We're going to name this Codex entries. And make sure you don't have a spacebar anywhere in here, otherwise it's not going to return anything, and you will pull your hair out wondering why. And we also have to change the asset base class type to DLG dialog. So what this is going to do is, well, also we need to add a directory. So over here in directories, hit this plus sign and hit these dot dot dots to choose our Codex entries. And what this is going to do is we can ask it to automatically find our Codex entries, which will return every DLG dialog inside this directory. So it's not going to return our test DLG because it's not inside the directory. And if we had other stuff in here that wasn't a DLG dialog, it wouldn't return that either. And to get this stuff, we can do get primary asset ID list. And the primary asset type is our Codex entries. So if we do a for each, and we break this array element, we can do a print, and we're going to print its name just to show you that it's working. Actually, we also need our Codex somewhere, so let's go to our widgets in our menu. We're going to add a Codex to our widget switcher, right there. And back in our level blueprint, I forgot to add it to the screen. Get game instance. By the way, if this cast to VN game instance doesn't show up, you can just go to your game instance and right click and save it, or open it, or do any other stuff with it, and it should show up in your level blueprint. Convert to purecast. Get widget. Menu widget, there it is, and add to viewport. Compile, press play, and there it is. You see a bunch of words show up, but it started with zebra and it ended with apple. That's because when you print stuff in the screen, it will push whatever you printed last into the bottom. So it actually did print in alphabetical order, it just didn't look like it. If we go to our output log over here, you'll notice that apple actually does show up first, going down in alphabetical order until it hits 0. Okay, so back in our Codex, let's get rid of these, and let's recombine this. What we're going to do with our array element is get object from primary asset ID. And this is just going to return an object reference because it doesn't know that it is a DLG dialog. So we need to cast to DLG dialog. Make this a purecast. And then we're going to do stuff with it. Now, like I said, we want our Codex to see if the button's name is a question mark or a pot. So we're actually going to start this dialog to find out what the first text is. So start dialog. And to start the dialog, we need our participants, and well, we have a really easy function to get our participants in our dialog widget. So let's get a reference to our dialog widget. We don't actually need a reference to it. Let's just get our get game instance, cast to VN game instance, get dialog widget. And then get participants. Passing in this dialog we're starting, and passing those participants into the start dialog, like so. And now we need a button to actually send in the text to, so let's create widget. It's going to be a Codex button, and our Codex button needs to have the text to modify, so let's get our text block and get text block and set text in the event construct, and I'm just going to promote that to a variable. We'll call that text. And let's make sure that the text is instance editable and exposed on spawn. Compile, save, and back to our codex. Let's refresh this and add our get active node text. And we're going to add this to our button scroll box. Now, we don't want this to just keep adding buttons every time our codex comes on the screen. So we need to make sure that we don't, well, we need to make sure that we check to see if we actually need to create a button or not. So let's get our array index, and we're going to ask if it is greater or equal to our button scroll box, children, get children count. There it is. We're going to branch on that. And pass that in there. Alternatively, we could just create these buttons when we start the game, and we create our codex. Actually, you know what, let's do that. It's going to be a lot cleaner if we do it that way. Let's delete these. And I'm just going to go to our... Well, let's go to our codex and create a new custom event. Add event, add custom event. We'll call this spawn codex buttons, or let's call it create codex buttons because we're not really spawning something. And this will do all that. Well, we're not going to start it. Copy and paste this. And for the over here when we create the codex button, actually this is going to be let's just move this down. We don't actually need to send in the text because it's going to update automatically, so we can break link to that. And we're just going to have blank text. It doesn't really matter. Create a codex button like that. And back in our game instance, when we create our buttons, make sure to tell our menus get w_codex to create codex buttons. Compile and save. Okay, so back in our codex, when we start the dialog, or when we update our button's text, we're going to get our button scroll box, get child at the index here, and cast to w_codex button, and then get text block and set the text like that. Okay. Compile, save, and let's see if this works. We'll hit play, start, go to our codex, and nothing happened because I forgot to make that actually work. Let's go to our dialog. In the codex button, there it is, unclicked. We're just going to do the same thing as up here, copy and paste, except we're going to do index 3. So over here in set active index, we're going to do 3. And what is this stuff? Set dialog options. Okay, so this is when we manually set our options. Oh, what's it called? Dialog widget, but we don't need to do that anymore because we do that at the very beginning of the game, so we can delete all this stuff. And let's do the same thing in our menu. Graph, in the on codex clicked, there it is. copy and paste this. And again, this is going to be index 3. Let's hit play, start Codex, and now we have a bunch of buttons. And I could have sworn that was enough to have our scroll box activate. Let's add another entry just to show the scroll box actually does activate. Control W to copy or duplicate this. I'm going to call this ZZZ. I don't really care. There we go. Now we have our scroll bar. Great. Now this is going to modify in size based on how the maximum width of our Codex buttons. So instead of just having it as a scroll box, I'm going to wrap this in a size box to force the width to be something bigger, so it doesn't constantly change in size. Press play, start Codex, and they show up. Great. I'm surprised they showed up as question marks. That's very strange. Oh, that's because I set the text right here. That's right. Alright, so if we go to our... You'll notice that this will now say pot. If the game instance says condition name returns pot is true, and in our test dialog, that happens when it says the pot can now be viewed in the Codex. So let's try that out. We'll hit play, start, go to the next line. The pot can now be viewed in the Codex. If we go to our Codex, down here, pot is now available. It says pot instead of question marks, and so it's Yuri because I set her to be introduced in that line. Okay. Now to actually make it so our buttons do something when we click on them, because right now they don't actually do anything. In the on Codex button clicked, we need to tell our Codex to do something. So let's go back to our Codex and make a new custom event. We'll call this show Codex details, and this is going to require the dialog that that button is associated with. So we need to add a new input. This is going to be dialog. We'll call this Codex entry. And our button needs to know what Codex entry it is, so back in our button, let's add a new variable, Codex entry, type of DLG dialog, make it public and expose to spawn, compile and save this, and then back in our Codex, when we spawn it, over here, right click and refresh it. We send in this Codex entry that we would have found from this for each loop. So over here we need to once again object from primary asset ID and cast to DLG dialog. Also, this text no longer needs to be exposed to spawn, so let me just get rid of that. Codex button, this text is... Let's just actually get rid of this. We don't really need to do this anymore, do we? There we go. Okay. So when we show the Codex details, first we need to start the Codex. Start the dialog. So start dialog. Once again, sending in our participants from our dialog widget. And in the very first line, again, is going to be whatever our text is. So in the title text, we're going to get that and set text to be active node text into here. Let's test this out. Compile, save, and play. We start, go to our Codex, hit these question marks, and nothing happens. We go back, go to the next line, Codex, for pot, nothing still happens. Alright, what's going on here? Did we get an error of any sort? Did I actually remember to plug in the... No, I did not. Alright, so this is my problem. We need to tell our codex to actually do something, so let's just add a new pointer to it, or not pointer, yeah, pointer. We'll call this codex widget. Again, expose this to spawn, and it's going to be a w_codex, and we're going to tell our codex widget to show codex details, passing in our codex entry. Back in our codex, let's once again refresh this node and send in our self. Okay, now it should work properly. Also, I'm gonna get our text block over here, set the text to be nothing at first because we just want it to be blank. When there's not showing anything, let's save and press play, start, go to our codex, nothing shows up here. If we hit these question marks, the title is now question marks. Great. If you go back, go to the next line, go to our codex, choose pot, it now says pot. Wonderful. Now we need to go to our codex and keep choosing option 0 until we hit an end node. And to do that, normally we would use like a for loop or a for each loop or something like that, but we don't actually know how many entries we're going to add, so we can't use a for loop. So instead we're going to use a recursive function, which is just a function that calls itself basically. Let's add a new function or custom event. I'm going to call this add to codex details. And this is going to take our dialog that we've started, because we need to choose option 0 there. So let's add a new dialog context. We'll call this codex context. Wow, that sounds awkward to say. And we also need a new parameter. This is going to be an integer. This is going to be the current index of the codex details we're dealing with. So let's compile and save this. And in our codex details, first off, we need to make sure we can modify this text, rich text block. Actually, you know, it's fine. Let's just do it in our codex. What we're going to do is we're going to ask if our detail scroll box get the children count. We're going to ask if our index is greater or equal to the children count. If it is, we're going to spawn a new codex details. Otherwise, we are going to just modify it. So if it's true, we are going to create widget. This is going to be codex detail, and then we're going to get rich text block 0 and set the text to be something, and that something is going to be our codex contents. It's going to be the line after we choose option 0. So choose oh, this is a context structure, my bad. This is dialog. This is a structure. This is dog. Oh, what was it? Back in our dialog here, it is a dialog. Choose option dog context object reference. dog context object reference. Okay, so that's what it's supposed to be. Compile and save this. So we're going to choose child 0 because there aren't ever going to be any choices. Into this branch node, and then we're going to get the active node text to target text, because this is a rich text block we're doing, and plug that in there. So if we aren't creating a new Codex detail, we are going to just get our child from our detail scroll box. So detail scroll box, get child at, sorry, not insert, this index over here, and then we're going to do the same thing as over here. Copy, paste. We need to cast to rich text block. Sorry, not rich text block. Cast to Codex detail. Like so. Okay, so after we do that, we need to make the function call itself again, but only if our choose_child did not return false, because if it returned false, that means we, here, let's do a branch. That means we hit an end node. So either way, these are both going to go to our branch. And in this branch, if it returns true, that means we keep going. So we need to make sure to increment our index and then call this again. So we're going to add to Codex details, passing in this Codex context over here, and the index plus 1. Let's compile, save, and try that. We hit play, start, go to our Codex, and nothing shows up. It's fine. Go back, next line, pot cannot be viewed in the Codex. We go to our Codex, hit pot, and this did not show up. Why is that? Because we forgot to call it in our show Codex details. Okay, make sure we call our add to Codex details, sending in this return value in the start dialog with an index of 0. Start, next line, Codex, and pot. Still no lines show up. That's actually very strange. Why is that? Let me debug this really quick. Choose Codex. So this is being called, I forgot to add this to our detail scroll box when I created it. Get a detail scroll box, add child, and we're adding our, this plugs into here, this plugs into here, and we're adding our return value in our create Codex details. One more time. Codex, pot, and now it says a pot. Great. If we go to Yuri, it says a girl with purple hair. If we go back and we choose inspect it, and we go to our Codex, choose pot, it now says a brown clay pot because we've inspected it. And now if we say break it, or sorry, that's leave it alone. Start again, go to our Codex, start, next line, Codex, pot, a brown clay pot. Okay, that's actually an issue with what we need to do later, but anyways, we will break it now, go to our Codex, go to our pot, and sadly it was broken, never to be usable again. That's great. However, if we now click Yuri, a girl with purple hair, okay, that's showing up fine because it's doing this even if the child is a end node. So let's fix that. If it's an end node, we don't need to update any text, so we can branch over here as well. Branch, or sorry, this branch doesn't happen here. It happens back here when we choose our child. And if it is not an end node, we'll continue on to this branch where we ask if we create a widget or if we just modify it. And if it's false, we're not going to do anything with it for now. And these both connect to our add to Codex details over here. If we compile, save, and hit play again, we should be able to see what the issue was. If we break it, go to our Codex, choose pot, and then go to Yuri, it says a girl with purple hair, but sadly it was broken, never to be usable again. It's still there because we're not telling all of our Codex entries after that to sort of go away. So let's take care of that. We're going to, in this branch, if we hit an end node, what we're going to do is say, get our detail scroll box, get child at, and we're going to do a for loop. This is going to be this is going to start at our index, and it's going to end at our detail scroll box get children count -1. So we're just going to go through all of the all of the remaining existing Codex entries, and we're going to tell them to go away. Let's see over here, and we could just set the text to be nothing, but you should really set them to be collapsed. So back in our, we're going to set visibility to collapsed. Also, we need to make sure to tell them to be visible when we modify the text. If we, well, modify the text, so cast to details over here. Let's also set visibility to be not visible, but hit test invisible, because we never actually want to be able to click on it. Like that. We might as well also set it to be hit test invisible up here when we create it at first. So set visibility panel slot object reference. Okay. Set visibility to be hit test invisible. If we compile, save, and play now, when we start, we break it, go to our Codex, choose pot, there's 2 lines. If we go to Yuri, there's only 1 line. Great. Now this is really close to our buttons over here, so I'm just going to add a little bit of padding when we create it. So after we create it, I'm also going to get as scroll box, sorry, as what was it called? Slot as, and there is no scroll box option. Never mind. Slot as uniform grid, vertical box, horizontal box. That's fine. We just add some padding over here instead. In the detail scroll box, I'm going to add padding on the left side. I'm going to say 50. Sure. Play, start, Codex, pot, and a pot now shows up with a little bit of padding over there. That's great. Also, I don't want this to be all the way at the bottom, touching our buttons. I'll fix that by just going to our menu, designer, and moving this up a little bit. Not moving it up, but moving the bottom anchor to say 150. There you go. That looks much better. That should do it for the Codex. I can't think of anything else I really need to do with this. Yeah, so I'll see you in the next video after cleaning this up a little bit.